fortunate to know many of the best guitar educators online, each with their own unique experience, insight, and style of teaching. One of the most prolific guitar teachers online is Matt Warnock, who has created a thriving, encouraging community. I connected with Matt recently, and this is what he had to say. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
No problem, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I see you all the time and every day, multiple times a day online, and I'm excited to touch base and pick your brain a bit. But I have to say, you seem to be one of the most generous guitar teachers on the internet. I mean, I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but they say you give what you put out there, and it seems like Matt Warnock guitar courses are doing very well. So tell me about your philosophy on teaching and sharing so much of yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I've thought a lot about it, about what to give away and what to put out into different contexts. So just to kind of put it in perspective, so I have my membership, which is a lot of interaction with my students, and so it's not 101, but it's a lot of small group stuff and daily lessons and workshops where we practice and play together. So there's that sort of access to me that my members have.
Right.
And there's the courses, which are pre-recorded, and people can access those at any time, and they can redo them, and they can go at their own pace and that sort of thing. Those are video and audio and stuff and PDFs, but it's not the live interaction. And then I do a lot of free stuff online. So I'm on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and everything. And I've always thought that, people shouldn't be restricted from learning to play jazz guitar based on their income. Right. So I want to give enough stuff away that if people can't afford to take my courses or can't afford a membership or private lessons from someone, they should still be able to learn how to play jazz guitar. I mean, that's something that I believe strongly in. So I create all this free stuff. It's sort of one layer of accessing me and the information I provide. And then the courses I keep as affordable as possible. Courses on my site run from $5 to $10 max. I try to keep them really affordable for people. And then the membership is like $25 to $30 a month, depending on what level people go for. So I'm always aware that, money's tight, especially right now. We're about to head into a recession if we aren't already there. And so I want to make sure that people who want to learn jazz guitar can, and they can do it for free or for a small investment in a course or for a little bit larger investment in the interactive membership. So
fantastic. That's noble stance, certainly. I heard a TED Talk a while ago, I think it was a TED Talk, and it was someone whose opinion I held in high regard. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they said, in order to be a truly exceptional teacher, not a good teacher, but a really exceptional teacher, you should focus on one type of student. And you seem to be doing that. So I don't know if you've heard that before or if that rings true to you, but in your years of teaching, do you find that that's the case? Like you really have distilled it down and you have one, ideal type of student that you serve exceptionally well?
I think that's correct in the beginning. Like the students that I'm trying to reach with the free material or the courses to try and get them to take the membership. Yes, I'm looking for people who want to play jazz guitar and have either been told or have felt that they weren't good enough. And so I'm here to say, well, you are good enough and you just have to be shown these things the right way and you can learn how to play. So those are the players that I'm looking for in the beginning. And then once they take a course or a membership and start working together, then of course everyone has their own pathway and they go in all sorts of different directions and that sort of thing. But I love working with people who are frustrated with their development, don't feel like they can play jazz, like it's too complex or it sounds like magic or something. and other people who, might not have great technique or fast chops or anything, or maybe they have undeveloped ears and they haven't sort of developed their ear training, but there's something missing in their playing. And when we identify that and then we work on it and we get better at it, all of a sudden they're playing jazz guitar. And it's not a super long process. I mean, most people who take my lessons, or especially like the membership, I mean, they're playing jazz on day one, whether it's sounding like Coltrane or not, probably not, but it does sound like jazz and it has that swing feel to it and the vocabulary and the language. And so getting people to just come out of the woods a little bit and so they're kind of lost and they're searching and just say, well, here, start here, work on this. And all of a sudden they're playing it, they get motivated and they take off from there, so.
And is there I got the sense based on the testimonials and some of the content that there's a real community on your website.
Mhm.
Is that the case? Is there like an interaction between your students online?
Oh yeah, huge. I'm really big on the community because I went through music programs at conservatories and colleges and universities where I learned as much from the guitar studio and my peers and saxophone players and other musicians as I did from my teachers. And having that sense of community was really important for me as a learner.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time and effort on promoting the community aspect. And the cool thing is, once people get in there and they start interacting with other players, they just take off. So we've had people who go on vacation together who met in
Oh wow.
my membership, yeah, and others who live in different countries all over the world, like U.S., Canada, France, Germany, Spain, and they're on Jam Kazam every day, jamming virtually on video and hanging out and recording stuff together, and they all met in that community, right? So, and the other thing besides just jamming together and getting to know each other, it's that support.
Right.
So in the membership, students are able to post as many videos or audio as they want for feedback from me, which is cool, and that helps them. I can help them build their strengths and focus on weaknesses in their playing. But the cool part is that they get a huge amount of support from their peers. So someone will post a video playing Stella by Starlight, whatever the song that we're studying, and I'll give them a little bit of feedback on, okay, your timing needs a little bit of work, but this was really strong over here. And then there'll be 20 comments from their peers saying like, oh, I love this part. I'm going to steal that. Thanks for playing this part. I really love that. And it just
Right.
makes them feel like they're not on their own learning guitar, because
Right.
guitar can be a very isolating instrument. We sit here, put our
For
heads
sure.
down. 20 years later, we look up and go, oh, yeah, I'm still practicing. So having that sense of community, I think, is really important for support. And it's just cool to have other guitarists to talk to and share things with, and know that we're not alone in this journey. So
Certainly. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And to your comment earlier, they say good musicians borrow and great musicians steal, right? I guess that could work for
yes,
other creative
steal
endeavors.
everything. Exactly.
It's fantastic. What is new? What is the latest at Matt Warnock Guitar? What is the latest course that you have?
Well, we have one coming out in January, actually. It's good timing. And it's going to be, the course is called Bebop Patterns from Scales to Solos. And I have a system I've developed over the years that helped me learn jazz, where you use scale shapes, like major scale, mixed leading, whatever scale you're playing, to translate the jazz language. So rather than thinking about notes or specific intervals, which can be tough in the beginning, we
Sure.
can use scale shapes on the guitar to translate the language very quickly. So within 3 to 5 minutes, someone who's never played jazz before, who knows a one octave major scale, can play a Charlie Parker lick, and then play a
Right.
Coltrane lick, and then play a Joe Pass lick. And then the way that I sort of set it up is that if you play it on a major scale, it's divided into 3 fingerings: 2/4, 1/2/4, or 1/3/4. And
Right.
those 3 fingerings occur in every mode of the major scale and every mode of melodic minor, the 14 kind of big modes that we use in jazz. So once someone learns a lick, say in a major scale, they can instantly play it in any key, any fingering, any mode of major or melodic minor. So it's really accessible and
Accessible.
applicable instantly. Yeah, so that's
Right.
coming up in January, and that will have a live component to it. So we'll do an hour session where I play with the students. And so I teach them, okay, here's the pattern, I'll comp and use solo, and we do it all live on Zoom, and there's like 60 people showing up, 75 people, whatever, and we're all kind of playing together on mute, of course, for them, so it's not chaos. But we do a lot of interactive playing, and that'll be a big part of it. And then there's PDFs and backing tracks and
Got it.
tune studies where they take the material and apply it to tunes. But it's for anybody who has wanted to learn jazz and just didn't feel like they could,
Of course.
or has been learning a bunch of scales and going, well, how come my scales don't sound like Wes Montgomery? Well, there's this part in the middle that you're missing, and so that's what we're going to study, is that part in the middle,
Got it.
and do that in a course in January. So it should be fun.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I'd imagine that approach to a degree would translate to the harmonic aspect, because as you mentioned in one of your videos, just it can get so overwhelming, the harmony in jazz, the naming of chords and the shapes and the inversions and everything. So I guess the two-part question, but if someone wanted to like get ready for jazz band and didn't know really what was going on, is there like one chord shape that you would suggest they run with and amend to like work?
Yeah, it would be shell chords, what we call shell chords, which, if you know the guitarist Freddie Green, who played with Count Basie, he used those chords a lot. Of course, everyone after him used those chords, but he's the one who's associated with them. And they're great because you can take a shell chord say root 7/3. Those are the intervals. They give you everything you need to sound the chord, the third and the seventh, plus the root. So you get everything there. And then from there, what's really cool is you can just take the root off and you have Lenny Bro chords, which are based on the third and seventh, the guide tones, right? So you have these 2-note chords that are really cool, and you can do some really cool things with those. Then if you take the root from the bass and you just say, well, what if I just flip it on top? Then you've got like Ed Bickert style chord with a nice melody on top, or Joe Pass style chord, which is really cool. And then you can add some scale notes in. And so you can start with Freddie Green, and with a few adjustments, you can be, in Joe Pass territory pretty quickly.
Right.
As far as the sounds that you're producing, maybe not the level of skill, but but the sounds that you're producing with the chords. So for me, I'm really big on, it's not about how many chord shapes we know as guitarists that makes us better. It's what can we do with the shapes that we know. And so if you can take a shell chord and drop the root off and then sound like Lenny Bro, and then you can put the root up top and sound like Ed Bickert, and then you can move the root up 2 frets to a ninth and sound more colorful like a Joe Pass or something.
Right.
Then we're doing well, because we're not learning 5 different shapes or 4 different shapes. It's one, and we just manipulate it, and all of a sudden we have all these cool different sounds to explore. So,
and that pathway, when you break it down in such a sequential way, must be like a guiding light for students. You know what I mean? If you take this whole abyss of jazz guitar and you say, okay, well, let's just distill it down to this, and then we add that, and then we add that, has to be encouraging in your community.
oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, jazz is complex when you start, learning a Coltrane solo or something, or you try to learn a Joe Pass chord phrase. I mean, it sounds almost impossible for most beginners. But when you break it down, you go, okay, well, it's just these 3 ingredients. And if you practice this ingredient and this ingredient and this ingredient separately, then it's much easier to put them all together and do the Joe Pass or Coltrane stuff.
Right.
But when you just say, okay, well, just go play over Stella by Starlight, which is a really difficult tune for most people, things fall apart very quickly, right? But if you say, well, let's just take the first 2 bars. Let's get comfortable with that first. Then we'll take the next 2 bars and we'll get comfortable with that. All of a sudden you have the 4-bar phrase, right? So breaking things down into like ingredients that go into chords and phrases and licks and solos, as well as breaking tunes down and not just trying to solo over an entire or comp over an entire big standard, trying it 1 bar at a time, 2 bars at a time. All of a sudden it's doable. We get that sort of endorphin rush. It's like, this is really cool. I'm having fun. We're motivated. We practice more. We get better, etc. So that's actually one of the biggest problems that people come to me with, is they say, well, I can't play jazz. And I say, well, what have you tried? And they say, well, I tried playing All the Things You Are. Okay, that's a very difficult tune for a beginner to play. And I say, well, how about the first chord? Can we just start with F minor 7? Okay, they're getting that. Well, how about the second chord? Let's do B flat, but just go back and forth. F minor, B flat minor. All of a sudden, they're getting in a groove. They're working on their swing feel. They're moving from chord to chord, starting to sound like the song. Much more manageable than playing a giant standard with all these different key changes and that sort of thing. So
certainly. If we kind of take it from the other end of the perspective, in your opinion, who, whether it's a guitarist or whether it's a saxophone or a pianist, who is the most impressive to you and the most in command of all of these advanced elements and approaches?
Well, if people are watching this, I'll point to the guy in the music stand behind me, Ben Monder. So Ben Monder to me is the epitome of all that stuff. I mean, he's got everything down, but it's not just the technique. He's very emotional in his playing. There's a lot of, like, for me anyways, I hear a lot of emotion in his playing, expression, development. There's a lot of intensity in his playing, and he's got and probably for me anyways, the best command of the instrument I've ever seen, with single notes and chords and harmony and all that kind of stuff. So if people haven't checked out Ben Mondry, he's not for everyone. He's a little bit more modern, and he's not going to sound like Joe Pass. He sounds a lot more sort of fusion-y or rock influenced, I guess, for lack of a better term, a lot of 20th century classical influence. But for me, he's amazing. And whenever I hear him play, he just blows me away. And he's actually going to be our guest artist in February for the membership. He's going to come in and do a workship for everyone, which is really cool.
Oh, that's exciting. That's definitely exciting. Yeah, I guess there comes a point where shedding, and to assimilate that is a whole other thing. Like, do you have advice for guitar players about that, where you can get so caught up in like the minutia and it's too close to your face, and then how to like assimilate it and just forget?
Yeah, I think
for that for students.
Yeah, I'll kind of tweak my answer a little bit to that, because to me, with the assimilation, it's about doing. So, but learning by doing. So there's this problem that happens in jazz where it happened to me. I mean, this is my story, is I felt, and I was sort of taught as a kid, 15, 16, whenever I started playing jazz, was if I learned a whole bunch of scales and arpeggios and chords one day, it sounded like Wes Montgomery, right? And so I learned every scale, every chord, every fingering, every arpeggio you could possibly imagine. And it didn't sound like Wes Montgomery for some reason. It sounded like chord scales and arpeggios. It was a mystery to me. And then one day I realized, oh yeah, improvising is a skill. And using these things is going to teach me how to improvise. And so when I started to put improvisation into my practice routine and treat it like I'm going to practice improvising with the major scale more than I practice playing the major scale, then my playing took off. And that's how it works with a lot of my students and members and stuff as well. So if people want to improvise, they want to assimilate the information, we have to practice assimilating it probably, way more than we do playing it. So when I talk to students, I usually tell them, if you can play something up and down like a major scale, at 80% and it's kind of memorized, clean it up by soloing. So then, okay, you got this major scale shape, now put a metronome on or a backing track or something and just improvise and see if you can learn by exploring the scale shape from there. Right. Because then all sorts of things come up like phrasing, rhythm, dynamics, articulation, repetition and development. Which strings do they like to play certain notes on? Do they like to solo in the top part of the fretboard or the bottom part, or go from one to the other? Do they like to add chromatic notes? How do you deal with those? And so, for me, all the learning really happens when we start improvising. So the, learning scales, chords, and arpeggios is a nice setup, but it doesn't really mean anything if we don't improvise with it. And then, of course, taking that stuff and applying it to tunes is the ultimate goal. So we do a lot of that work in the community, where we try to take, okay, here's a major scale or whatever we're working on. How do you use that to solo over all the things you are? Okay, now we're really getting, practical, and that information is becoming valuable. A scale is just a scale, but a scale that allows you to solo on a standard, that's valuable for a jazz guitarist. Right? So that's what we're always looking at.
So I'd imagine, looking just kind of, superficially at your career arc and everything, it reminds me of this quote of some Eastern philosopher, and they were like, if you're interested in something, read about it, and if you want to get good at it, do it, and if you want to master it, teach it. So I guess my question to you is, one, like, what did you wish you knew before you became a professional? And two, like, how much have you grown from teaching, and like, what are the main insights and like points of growth that you've found or have evolved for you from teaching so much?
Well, I guess they're probably the same answer, because I teach what I wish I had known, or I wish someone had shown me, because I had my problems and I dealt with them certain ways, and I solved those problems through a lot of trial and error. Right. And I wish I had a lot of the shortcuts that I have now. And so that's what I teach. But it's, one of the big sort of problem areas I had, and that a lot of players have, is that we try to learn too much. Right. So we take the pentatonic scale. Well, there are 5 boxes for it, standard boxes that we learn. The reality is, as a jazz musician, I might use 2.5 of those, maybe 1 for a lot of different, situations, because chord changes move quickly, keys move quickly. We're not going to run the entire fretboard a lot of the time. I mean, in one key, right? We're always sort of switching scales and keys and arpeggios. Right. So what I started to do with my students that would have really helped me when I was learning, and that, is helping my students through my teaching, through focusing on it, is learn one thing. So learn box pattern 1 for pentatonic scale, and then go as deep on that as you can. Only when you feel like you're missing something, so you're trying to play something, you're like, I can't get the sounds in my head out with this one box, then add a second box or add a second device, whatever it is. But there's this sort of pathway many guitarists go down, and I'm definitely that person who went down it, where we say, I'm going to learn every major scale, and then, that takes 4 years or 5 years, and then I'm going to start to improvise. Well, going through that myself, I realized, okay, I learned all this stuff and I used like 10% of it. So I would have probably been better off to start with like learning 5% of that, and then adding the other 5% over time that I needed, and stopping there and spending more time being creative, improvising over tunes or comping over tunes, jamming, focusing on phrasing and articulation and dynamics and all the musical stuff. So we always like to start small. So rather than saying, here's everything that's possible, learn it all, and then we'll whittle it down. It's like, oh no, just learn one small thing. When you feel the need, add another one. And when you stop feeling a need, you're done, at least for now. And then over time, you can add more things as needed. But that takes a lot of the overwhelm, out of learning jazz guitar, because it's pretty overwhelming in the beginning.
Sure.
Especially if you buy like a chord book or something,
Oh yeah.
and there's 85,000 chords in the book, and you're like, wow, I
Oh,
have to learn all these
right.
to play jazz. It's like, no, you need one major chord, one major seven, one minor seven, one dominant seven, one half diminished, one altered.
Yeah.
5 chords. If you can do one shape for each of those, you can play pretty much every jazz standard,
Right.
right? And then you can add more from there. So yeah.
Got it. So practically, would you say, first position minor pentatonic 2 octaves, or would you say like first position 1 octave and then like string shift that and move it around?
It depends on the situation. I teach both
Right.
sometimes, because a lot of players come from a rock background into jazz or
Right.
blues, so they know the boxes.
Sure.
So me sort of, if I say, well, just use half of that box, it usually causes some issues in the beginning. So I just said, well, just use the box. It's fine. If someone's starting from scratch, yeah, 1 octave is probably a good place to begin.
It's such
Um,
a peculiar thing because the guitar is such a visual instrument, which like leads to growth early. Like, you can fool yourself into thinking that like, you're better than you are, and then other instruments that like visual thing is not so dominant,
no.
and there's just such a discrepancy with, for example, technique and theory and just musical awareness with so many guitarists early on. It's just it's such a peculiar thing, and you can like play, enjoy guitar, whatever, and really know virtually nothing about music. It's just an amazing thing. And as you're alluding to, a lot of problems down the line if you don't have the guidance of someone like yourself. Um, so if we pivot for a second, like jazz guitar has come, has had different moments in like popular music. And I feel like in the whole lo-fi beats to study to culture, it's had, another resurgence. You might think of like the 70s as in George Benson or something, another like high point in high level jazz guitar in pop music on the radio. Do you have a favorite, or like what's your take on that? Because it isn't real. I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends who you ask, but it's like jazz-esque, it isn't really jazz in a lot of ways, but to your average listener, it would be, and it's like a lot of the complex harmony and everything else. But what's your opinion on that cultural phenomenon of lo-fi hip hop?
Um, I think if you don't call it jazz, a lot of people will like it. And so when you take the label off, it's like, oh yeah, cool, that's great music, right? Um, and so like someone like Benson, right? Like I saw Benson live a couple years ago, and I used to live in Arizona, and he came and played right before COVID hit, so I got to see him before they shut everything down, and he was amazing. And I was sitting there with a friend of mine who's a really talented guitarist, and we were just in awe, watching him play. And he's playing like on Broadway, which is a pop tune, and he's just ripping Coltrane lines over it. And I remember thinking, like, everyone in this, there's 2,000 people here, they're all standing and dancing as he's doing this, and he's playing Coltrane lines, or I mean, like that style of playing.
Right.
And I was just like, this is amazing. He's really figured this out because he gets to play all this cool hip jazz stuff, and then people get up and dance.
Right.
That's a
Yeah.
pretty rare phenomenon.
Totally.
So yeah, for me, I think like, especially nowadays with all the access to music on Spotify or iTunes or Apple Music or Google, Play, whatever it is, people will hopefully start to integrate styles, and we'll start to associate it with like if you say the band Steely Dan, well, what genre is that? It depends on the song or the album or the time period, right? And so they're
Socks and
not really.
sandals.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm hoping it kind of gets to that in the future where we just think about artists, right? And those artists take all sorts of different influences, and they do things that are, accessible to the public in popular genres and popular music. But when we start to say like jazz fusion or jazz, a lot of people just will turn it off because of the word. And if
Sure.
they just heard it, they go, yeah, that's really cool. It's like, a hip hop beat with some guitar solo over it. Great. That's really cool. But when you
Yeah.
say it's like jazz hip hop or something, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, they're not going to listen to it. So I think there's a lot of
Frame
opportunity
that.
there.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, exactly. And I think, like one of my favorite bands, and this might surprise people, is the Mars Volta, who I just love. But try to put a genre on them. I mean, like it's like pretty impossible, right? Or so I like those kind of groups that are just groups, and they take all sorts of different influences, and jazz might be one of them, because there's always going to be jazz for people who want to search for jazz and listen to jazz guitarists or musicians. That genre will exist, and there's stuff there. But in the popular genre, I think, if artists are going to take jazz and add to their playing, it'd be cool if they didn't sort of label it as it, or, maybe mention it in interviews and try to spread the word that they were influenced by jazz, and that will help other people explore it. But for some reason, that label just turned a lot of people away. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens. But I've heard a lot of that sort of happening more like you go on TikTok and or YouTube or whatever, and hear people doing mashups and different things and different genres, and it's really cool. And I hope they do more of that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard Benson is completely ear, like he doesn't know a 9 chord from a 9 iron, which is incredible that you would have such a command of like Coltrane lines and that kind of thing. If you know, I've and very infrequently have I like crossed paths with people who are just like naturals at the guitar. You know what I mean? It's like being a natural at golf or something. I mean, it's just that it takes so much to like really get on top of it. To see someone like Benson or someone it's like seems so effortless, and they have like the musicality and the command of the fretboard and on and on. Have you seen that in your own students much?
a little bit. It tends to be a generational thing, and unfortunately, I'm not sure if that's going to happen ever again because of the information age, right?
Yeah.
So Lenny Breau was the same way as Benson. You know that there's these great clinics of Lenny Breau, who's just one of the most advanced guitarists of his generation. And you watch him talk, and he's like, "Well, this chord's really bright, and this chord's really dark," and he doesn't care about if it's a D7 sharp 9 or a B flat 13, whatever. It's like, this is the bright chord I need in this moment, and he plays it, right? And there's these videos of Wes rehearsing bands, Wes Montgomery, and he's just using terms that make sense to him and the band. He's not necessarily using correct labels and stuff as we would call them today, but it totally made sense to him, and the band understood, and they were communicating, and that's perfect. But what happens now is if someone wants to play guitar, let's say, or even beginner guitar or jazz guitar or whatever, the first thing they do is go on YouTube or Google and they search for something, and they're influenced by a teacher or some sort of learning situation. Whereas Benson would go, "Oh, I want to sound like Wes. Here's the LP, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to learn it." Or Lenny Breau would sit there and study all sorts of Bill Evans chords, and you'd be transcribing off records and different things. So the type of learning and style of learning that we do today, it's really effective. It's really great for speeding up the process. It also changes that experience, right? So it's more of a learning through studying rather than learning through curiosity, which is, I think, how the older players learn, because they didn't have access to books. And I mean, jazz guitar books didn't exist until really 70s, 80s. There was a couple. There was like the Van Epps books and then the Mickey Baker things, but it wasn't easily accessible. If you didn't live in a big city, you probably couldn't find them in a bookstore or a music store. So even for me growing up, I grew up in a town of like 70,000 people, and whatever jazz books they had at the local stores, the ones I bought was like, that was it. And so, but nowadays you can go on and, like I used to buy Alan Holdsworth books. Well, I can go on YouTube and I can just punch in Alan Holdsworth. I can learn directly from him. Sure. I can steal this stuff and he's talking about how he thinks about things. So the learning process has changed. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And so I don't see a lot of that sort of self-taught history with people who come to me. They've done something. Maybe they were self-taught to begin with because they're maybe a little bit older, and so they've had that experience. But now it's, I've taken TrueFire courses. I've been on YouTube. I've bought these books. I've done these things. And then what we do is just sort of try to organize all that chaos into like a practice plan and, and simplify it down and that sort of thing. So
it's a great insight. That's a great insight in terms of the how we've moved on, how the culture has moved on, technology has moved on, and how that's influenced the experience. We'll expand on and extrapolate on that in a second, but you mentioned Holsworth. I have a question for you. Do you think Superlocrian is jealous of the attention Super Ultra Hyper Mega Meta Lydian is getting?
Absolutely. It's funny, but like a lot of the labels for modes are very regional, and so now that everyone's on the internet, they're all clashing. And so, like you said, Superlocrian, to me, that's like a Berkeley thing, or I don't know if it's Berkeley exactly, but it's like an East Coast, New York, Boston thing. But if you were, down in Miami, it would be the altered scale. Right. And then if you were in Montreal, it would be the what would they call it? Diminished whole tone scale or something. Yeah, there's like all these different things. Yeah, exactly. With some smoked meat and gravy on it, maybe all said. But yeah, like all those labels are interesting because jazz is going through a real turning point right now as we're trying to take all these labels, especially for chord symbols. Right. Like you take a major 7, well, that could be a capital M7. It could be a 7 with a line through it. It could be a delta sign, like a triangle. It could be MAJ7, because they came up in different things, the Aebersold books or the Berkeley books or whatever. And so now all these labels are getting kind of institutionalized. Like in classical music, they've had labels for hundreds of years, and that label is that label. But in jazz, you could have one chord symbol and it can have, or one chord type, and it can have 6 different ways of writing it down. But we're trying to fix that, I think, as a group, sort of subconsciously, and it's getting narrowed down. So I wonder if Superlocrian will exist in 5 years. It might just be the altered scale, and, and we've moved on. So it'll be really jealous then. That's for sure.
It would be, right? It would be like what, 1, 2, 3, sharp 4. Then it would be 5, 6, 7, flat 9, or something like that. Because like this, it's just like Lydian that repeats on the 5th, or like the first tetrachord of Lydian that repeats on the 5th, or whatever. So it's like 1, 2, 3, sharp 4. Then on 5, I think it repeats. The whole Jacob Collier thing, who again has gotten a lot of attention. Exciting guy. But in any case, how, if we backtrack a bit to like how the experience of learning the guitar, what it was like decades ago and what it is today, how do you think it's going to evolve? I mean, like, trying to guess how technology goes is never going to be that accurate. It's almost always something that you can't imagine. But if we're to fast forward, like, how do you think that evolves in a positive way?
Well, as far as the instrument is concerned, I think we're seeing an evolution now where you have a lot of more digital instruments. There's that TikTok guitar people play. I don't know what it is, but it's got, you plug it in, it's got some stuff. And Gibson has experimented with all sorts of digital technology in their guitars and everything, and these big companies are trying it a little bit. But I think with the younger people, we're going to have this split. It's just like anything. You're going to have people who are like adamant about the acoustic stuff, and you got to have a piece of wood that you play, and it has to have all these things on it. And then people are like, well, the guitar has pickups and a fretboard, so as long as I have those, I'm fine. Right? And you're going to have this sort of alter technology crowd who just wants to explore the technology, and the people who are more, I guess, like historic and want to play acoustic instruments, or like you're holding there, the Strat type guitar there. But I think that's where we're kind of splitting now, and that's where we'll split. It's like pianos and keyboards had a split many years ago where it was like there's the keyboard players, and then there was of course the Fender Rhodes and the Moog and all those kind of things, and then there was people who were just like, this is a Steinway Grand, I'm going to play this till I die, right? And so there's those two camps. Yeah, exactly. So I think we're seeing that now, and that's probably where the evolution will go. And hopefully the two camps don't sort of push away from each other, but learn from each other and borrow from each other. It's pretty amazing to, I'm of two thoughts of this, because it's pretty amazing to watch someone on YouTube or something, or Instagram, who's 22 years old, and they're playing something that is technically the most advanced thing I've ever seen. It's just unbelievably clean and clear, and the process sound is like perfection, right? And I dig some of that because there's a part of me who's a gymnast and likes to do all the virtuosic stuff, and it's very cool. And then there's sort of the camp of people who are just strumming an acoustic guitar and it's kind of out of tune, and they're just like fret buzzing, but they're playing the most beautiful song they've ever written, right? And so I'm hoping that those two camps don't keep splitting, and we kind of go back and forth and borrow from each other, because I love the technical virtuosity as long as it has an emotion behind it, or a reason to it. And I also like the emotional quality of a great singer-songwriter song, or whatever, a jazz crooner or something, or a vocalist, as long as there's some technical proficiency to it, right? So I think both camps could borrow from each other, but we're definitely seeing that split right now out there in the instrument and in how people are applying. I mean, if you like one video on TikTok or YouTube or something of like some ultra shredder, perfectly clean everything, you're going to see that there are like thousands of these people out there just nailing this stuff at a level I didn't think was even possible. And it's very inspiring. I'm like, wow, this is unbelievably cool. But I also like, clicking on a singer-songwriter and getting exposed to something that's totally acoustic, or just, more on the emotional side than the technical side, right? So hopefully people can enjoy both of those sort of camps going forward, and they don't split too much. So.
Yeah, I hope so too. And you're right, it is such a pristine tone, that like hyper compressed direct tone.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this like resonates with you, but it reminds me of like the shred thing, where it's like some of that stuff you can only pull off if you have the appropriate tone, which, I guess just it's subjective either way, but I don't know. For some people would take issue with that. It's like, if you can't play it, you can't play it kind of thing. I don't know. But like some of that stuff you can only, if like the stars align with your rig, then you can do it. But if not, it's just like ding dong dong. Whatever. It's okay.
That's true. Yeah.
But I guess in terms of, yeah, those are all like really interesting points about the evolution of the instrument, and it's like people's perspective on what their definition of a guitar should be and could be. And I guess I'm just curious about like how software and all this stuff kind of will impact the and AI will impact the learning experience. And like you'll see, if you're seeing 22-year-old virtuosos playing incredible gent stuff now, like what we're going to be seeing in 20 years. Or if it's just like the cockroaches running around at that point, I don't know. But we will find out, God willing. Tell me about your guitar. If we pivot a bit, tell me about your guitar and your process of ordering, right? Because you have like a bespoke custom guitar.
I have several. I have the red one behind me. I don't know if people can see that, but I have a couple of sort of Telly style guitars that I've had custom built by a luthier out in LA named Dan Canetop, who's a phenomenal maker. And he built my first two custom guitars, one in 2011 and one in about 2017. And this one I just got last week, and this is my new one. This is made by Jubilee Original Guitars, and they're a local company. Actually, a guy I went to high school with, Keith, and his friend John do it. Run the company, and this was built pretty much with wood that was grown here. I live in northern Ontario, so just north of Michigan, and the wood here is some of the best in the world. So, little known fact: there's a guy who works here, and he's very secret, he's a very kind of quiet person, but he works for Fender, Gibson, and Paul Reed Smith and all their custom guitars, and he goes around and harvests wood. And then he sells it to them for their custom. If you played a Gibson custom or a Paul Reed Smith custom, chances are some or most of that wood came from my neighborhood where I live, which is
Interesting.
kind
I
of cool.
didn't know that. I didn't know that was the region for tone woods. Interesting.
Yeah, it's very cool because of our maple here. So like the maple, this is all natural, just maple. It's hard to kind of see in the camera, but
Beautiful.
that's just local maple. And the cool thing is it has all the grooves in it of the maple, but there's bird's eye in the grooves as well, which is really kind of nice. So yeah, this is it's pine and maple, and then I've got the rosewood fretboard, which didn't come from here. We can't grow rosewood here; it's too cold. And then all the bindings are all maple. Like all the binding here, this is all maple, and even the pickup covers, it's all wood basically. Everything I can get to be made of wood, and then just the bridge and the pickups and the nut and stuff are not wood, but that's it.
It's beautiful. How long did you have to
Thanks.
wait to get that?
6 months. And it's
Yeah.
mostly because of the staining, because it's really blue. You see the back, yeah. So it's really cool, but you put a coat of stain on and then you just wait, and then you put a coat of stain on and you wait, and so it could have taken probably 2 to 3 months without the staining, but I really wanted a lot of blue, so you can see it's a lot of blue.
Yeah, it's
Um,
stunning. It reminds me of those blue guitars from, I don't know when that was, like maybe in the early
yeah, all
2000s.
those arch tops they made. Yeah, I
Yeah.
forget.
What was that about? Do you remember all those amazing blue guitars?
I forget the actual story. I just remember Steve Howe was involved, I think. Like there was an old guitar roll I remember reading, and Steve Howe went to some, I'm going to say, I'm probably wrong on the details, but it was some barn up in like upstate New York by Woodstock or something. And they were all there. And there's this photo of him with all the guitars and he playing them and all those kind of things, which is kind of cool. And I've seen a few of them recently come out. I think it was the Rocky Mountain Archtop Festival this year. One of the big Archtop Festivals had a couple of them and people were playing them, and it just reminded me of them. But yeah, this is kind of inspired by that blue a little bit, but it's like a 339. It's smaller than a 335 because I have a lot of back problems, so a smaller guitar is better. And I used to have an old Ibanez from 1981 that was this. It was this guitar, but it was solid body, didn't have the semi hollow, and so they kind of modeled it after that guitar, which I mistakenly sold and then regretted every day
Yeah.
since.
Everyone has a story like that, right? Every guitar
Oh,
has
yeah,
a story
absolutely.
like that.
But they were able to get two pickups from, I think these are 81s or maybe late 70s. These are Ibanez pickups
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
from that guitar, basically, that I used to love. And so they put those in. And there's no pickup switch because I never use one. So the way that I dial in the different pickups is with like a volume knob. So this volume knob just controls the bridge, and this controls the neck,
Great.
and I can adjust the tone that way because I realized on my Telecasters I haven't gone from the middle pickup switch in like 12 years. So I was like, don't put one in. It's just an extra hole in the guitar I don't need. And so they did a really cool job with that, and I've been having fun exploring the tone and everything. It's a little, I don't know anything. I'm very non-technical when it comes to guitars. Like it feels good, it sounds good, I'll play it.
Okay.
But I know that the scale length is shorter than my Tele a little bit. And it's been a little bit of an adjustment, but I love it. It's actually really easy to play, and yeah, I'm just having fun getting to know this guitar. But it's only
exciting.
about a week old, so yeah.
It's amazing the difference that makes too. You think maybe it shouldn't, but when you're comfortable, you play things that you might or would not ordinarily play if you're really feeling comfortable with something, really connecting it in with the guitar in that way. So tell me, if there's a student out there watching this and wants to learn more about your courses and become a part of your community and take their jazz guitar playing to the next level, what should they do?
They can go to my website. Well, you can Google my name, Matt Warnock, or MWG Guitar. You'll find all my stuff. But my website is mwgcourses.com. And on there, it has a bunch of information about the membership and the different courses. And I work really closely with all the members. So if someone's interested in the membership, just email me, contact me through the website or Facebook or YouTube or whatever you want to message me on. And I'm happy to answer questions. And people who do sign up for the membership, I work with them from day one. So we sit down and I help them, figure out where to start on the site and what's best for them and how to organize their practice routine. If they want that, I'm there for that. So they can always reach out. I'm happy to answer questions and, by email or whatever, chat or whatever it is. And then we can go from there. So
fantastic. Well, Matt, it was really, really great to meet you telephonically and to touch base.
Yes, you too, Chris.
Our paths have been crossing for longer than I'd like to admit, I think.
Yes.
But, I'm looking forward to your new course in January and the new guest spot that you're having in February. That's really exciting. It's great to meet some of our heroes. I'm sure you've met some of your guitar heroes along the way, and it's a peculiar thing. But I'm really looking forward to what's next for you.
Thanks, me too, and thanks for having me. This was a really fun conversation. Just great to meet you finally. I see you every day on Facebook, and I'm like, it'd be nice to talk to Chris one of these days. And then here we are.
Exactly. Well, we'll do this again, and thanks again for taking the time. And good luck to you in 2023.
Thanks, you too, Chris. I'll talk to you soon.
There you have it. Through our own challenges and struggles, we become uniquely qualified to help those who come after us. We become the antidote for a specific problem we've encountered and conquered. Check out Matt's website for more.